Okay, I want to test to make sure you can all hear me okay. Not that many of us, so we ought to be able to bunch together and hear well. I'm sorry, they can't turn any of these lights out because they're broken. Some guy worked on them, said he was going to fix them in 30 minutes. He worked 6 hours, and we still can't turn them off. So that's. I'm not going to tell you. I leave that up to you. All right. You bring your BB gun, and I'm off the hook. Welcome to the third and final talk about baseball when it was a game. Old-time baseball from the perspective of a guy who's been a memorabilia collector for too long, 75 years, and who started off by sending penny postcards to baseball players and surprisingly having them respond. That didn't work. All right, let's try that. Today we're going to talk about obits and other bits, how people are remembered in spite of themselves. The nice thing about being dead is it's not up to you anymore, it's up to somebody else. And surprisingly, as long as you fit in the governing historical narrative, you might come out pretty well. But insofar as you don't fit in the latest historical narrative, even in the sports world, your reputation may die quickly. First of all, we're going to start off with some photobombs. Now, photobombs are unintentional inclusion of something in a photograph that you take, or intentional. I mean, but people photobomb other people's photos, all right? Stick their face in from the side or do something like that. But I'm looking at it from the perspective of kind of unintentional. And that is, for example, the photographer was either trying to take a picture of a puffer fish or another swimmer. In either case, he got more than what he'd hoped for. In this case, person was trying to take a photograph of a rainbow and got some help. And when you catch the big fish, you're now prone to want to take a selfie. And here's a guy taking a selfie that piqued his dog's interest, right? In 2014, the New York Times went through its archives, its photographic archives, and was cleaning them up to a certain degree, and came across a Civil War photograph. And it was a Civil War photograph of Company G of the 48th New York Infantry Regiment, taken at Fort Pulaski, Georgia, after the 48th had recaptured the fort. Hey, Joe, good to see you. And surprisingly, they got more than they bargained for. It's one of the earliest surviving photographs of a baseball game. If you look in the background, you can see the game in progress. The fellow in the white shirt is the pitcher. The batter's over here. I think the first baseman's over here, and so forth, looking around. The pitcher is, as in softball, the pitcher is pitching underhanded, and it's a friendly game. But this is what the support troops are doing while the regulars are out there getting their picture taken. They're having a good time, and rightfully so. A different perspective, same picture. Okay. Let's see, where am I going with this? One of my favorite authors is Julian Barnes. He's a novelist. He's not a historian. He's a novelist. But he writes wonderful novels and very incisive. And in the novel, Sense of an Ending, school students are looking back at what happened in their lives and remembering their course on history when they were asked what is history and what their responses were. Of course, history is the lies of the victor was the first one they came up with. Second one, history is the lies of the victor and the self-delusions of the defeated. And as they got more sophisticated over time, history is the certainty produced at the point where the imperfections of memory meet the inadequacies of documentation. And that pretty well nails it in terms of how people are remembered as well. Finally, they threw it all out the window and they said, all we really could be assured of is that something happened. And that's also a good way to go if you're in trouble. In collecting, sometimes you come across very curious objects. And I came across this card lying on a table for sale at a card show in Richmond 30 years ago. It says, first of all, it's decorated, pen and ink, all the way around with little squiggles. Guys tried to make it look very interesting, all right? It says, the only rookie pitcher in the history of the National League that led that organization the first 2 years under the big tent with Baltimore. 1895, 31 wins, 7 losses, .816. 1896, 26 wins, 7 losses, .788. 1897, 22 wins, 10 losses, .688. W.L. Hoffer, Cedar Rapids, Iowa, 1817, 6th Avenue Southeast. So you could write to it. Here's a guy who wants to be remembered. And he's reaching out to whoever gets his card to remember him. So Bill Hoffer mentions he played for Baltimore in the 1895 Baltimore Orioles. Who were the 1895 Baltimore Orioles? We happen to have a good team photograph of them. And they're a sparkling bunch of fellas. These were the orneriest, most low-down, dirtiest playing baseball team that's ever been part of organized sport. They did anything and everything to win. They were especially good at intimidating umpires. They were the originators of the hit and run and the suicide squeeze bunt, among many, many other things that they originated, most of which have been discarded by the civilized world. So let's look at some of the individuals. Joe Kelly. Joe Kelly is a Hall of Famer. He batted over 300 for 11 seasons, and he wound up managing the Cincinnati Reds later on in his career. Going down to the next one, guy by the name of McGraw. John J. McGraw, Hall of Famer. He holds the highest batting average for a third baseman in history. He managed the New York Giants for 30 years. Manager of Christy Mathewson and all those teams. As a manager, he won 10 pennants and 3 World Series. The next person, Jennings. Who's Jennings? Huey Jennings. Huey Jennings, Hall of Famer. He has a law degree from Cornell. It's interesting, you find all these hardscrabble sons of immigrants, uneducated, playing baseball next to people who are well-educated, university graduates, and so on and so forth. There are two university graduates on the 1895 Orioles, Huey being one of them. He was captain of the team and shortstop, and he was notorious for successfully faking being hit by a pitch. He had ways of making his skin turn red that you won't believe. And he used them indiscriminately whenever they needed a base runner. He would swear that he was hit by a pitch, and usually the umpire, being slightly intimidated, would give it to him. He had 2 skull fractures in his career. Once was a beanball thrown by Amos Russi that took him out, and the other was when he was drunk and dove into a swimming pool that had no water in it. He managed the Detroit Tigers for 3 straight pennants, and he was the manager of Ty Cobb during those years. Next, Keeler. Keeler was Wee Willie Keeler, another Hall of Famer. Lifetime batting average of .341. Originator of the Baltimore Chop. Now, the Baltimore Chop was a play that required a groundskeeper who could keep his mouth shut. The groundskeeper was required to harden the surface in front of home plate to the consistency of concrete, so that when a batter chopped down on the ball, it would bounce high enough up in the air that he would be able to make it safely to first base before the ball came down. And that was the Baltimore Chop, and it wasn't patented, but it was certainly one of their notorious plays. He said that his cry was, "Hit 'em where they ain't," and he did it with a 48-ounce bat. Normally, bats now are around 32 or 33 ounces, something like that. Okay. Next, who we got? That dog. Wilbert Robinson, another Hall of Famer, catcher. He once caught a triple header one day and a double header the very next. So all you wusses out there who can't go more than 7 or 8 innings, beware. He was the manager of the Brooklyn Robins. Now the Robins were named after him. But before they were the Robins, they were the Trolley Dodgers, and then they were the, pardon me? Trolley Dodgers, the Robins, and then ultimately the Dodgers. He was their manager for 17 successful years, insofar as the Dodgers were ever successful at that time. Okay, and Kid Gleason. Kid Gleason is not in the Hall of Fame. He's a 20-year pitcher. He managed the Chicago White Sox from 1919 to 1923, and he is the manager of the notorious Black Sox. Needless to say, his career didn't go very far after that scandal hit. Although he had very little to do with it in terms of being causal or anything like that. He was as bad off as the players were in terms of contracts and acceptance. Finally, we're going to get to him. Nope, Arlie Pond. Here's the other college-educated member of the team. He was a solid starting pitcher for 2 years. He became an Army surgeon in 1899 and went to the Philippines. And he was a part of a public health drive that worked on fighting bubonic plague, cholera, smallpox, and leprosy. And he did that in the Army for a while. He then did it as a civilian for a while. And he finally retired in the Philippines as a farmer and a rancher, and made a lot of money doing it, which nobody begrudged him because of his public service before that. There's the team. And who's Bill Hoffer? Well, Bill Hoffer, as you already know, is from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. He had only 3 full seasons with the Baltimore Orioles, and his first one being the one where he won 31 games. He had 93 complete games. He won 79, lost 24. He had the highest one-loss percentage in baseball during the period that he was with the Baltimore Orioles. And he enabled the Orioles to win the National League championship twice. In his first year, he won 40% of the games that his team won, and they were all but one, I think, complete games. All right. In 1899, he was not able to pitch well at the start of the season. He'd had 3 terrific seasons and was tired, sore arm. I don't know, whatever it was. They say about him that he was, quote, sick. Is the best you can make out. He was released by the team in July and bounced around several other teams, hit and miss. Subsequently, in 1901, when the new American League was formed, he was picked up by Cleveland, and because the weather was bad in most of the cities where the new American League was to play the opening game, he pitched in the first opening game of the American League. He lost. He's the first losing pitcher in the American League history. But he recorded the first strikeout in the American League and the first walk, and probably the first balk too, but I don't know that for sure. Subsequently, he hung around baseball, but not the major leagues, for probably another 10 years or so. Went back to Cedar Rapids, Iowa, worked for the post office for a while, and then worked for the Cedar Rapids Railroad, where he was a conductor for 20 or 30 years. Interestingly enough, you saw the doodles on the postcard. He was an artist, and this is one of his works of art that he drew, probably in the 1930s. He would start in September of the year, and he would make pen and ink drawings for his Christmas cards, and he would send 50 or 60 Christmas cards to friends, all with his pictures on them. I don't know of anybody who's got one. If they would, I would go crazy trying to find it. But this is one of his drawings. And back to his original cry out for help. A tremendous story, I think, goes with it, and something we can all learn from and appreciate, putting this particular baseball player in his context. Okay, let's go to some New York Times obituaries. Now, there's some are very straightforward, and you say, yeah, so what? Like Chick Gandil. Chick Gandil, 82, White Sox star, who threw in the 1919 World Series, dies. Okay. That's very straightforward. Interesting thing to me in the first paragraph is he died 10 weeks ago, but his death went virtually unnoticed until today. In any event, this is a gimme in terms of obituaries. Others are more interesting, perhaps. For example, this is Father Al Travers, who is a Jesuit priest. And he was an educator at the dean of St. Joseph's College in Philadelphia. Very well-respected gentleman. This is his obituary in the New York Times. Had a one-day career as a major league pitcher and gave up 24 runs, still a record. Died yesterday at Misericordia Hospital. He was 75 years old.
What does Misericordia mean?
I have no idea. It's a name. I'm sure if we had our Latin experts here, somebody would tell me about that. But I don't know. It's not. I don't know. I'll find out for you, Joe. Anyway, this is Reverend Travers in a Detroit Tigers uniform, you'll notice, warming up on May 18th, 1912. He was also known as the student assistant manager of the St. Joseph's College baseball team. Now, how did he get to wear a Detroit Tigers uniform and pitch for the Detroit Tigers? Well, 3 days before this game, the Tigers were playing the New York Highlanders. Some of you already know the story. And a fan in the stands was getting on the case of Ty Cobb. Ty Cobb was playing for the Detroit Tigers. Somebody got on his case. And what you could not do, what Ty Cobb could not stand, was someone tearing up his mother. He was very close to his mother. And if you said bad things about his mother, I don't care who you were, he'd be on you. Well, Ty went up in the stands, and he beat the crap out of this person who had been bad-mouthing his mother. It turned out that the person he beat out, he was listed in the paper the next day as a cripple. Actually, he'd lost 3 fingers in an accident, just like Mordecai Brown had lost them. He lost 3 fingers, so he was crippled. But he was, man enough to scream and bloody murder Ty Cobb. Anyway, Ty Cobb went up in the stands, beat him up, and the next day the American League commissioner said, Ty Cobb, you're suspended indefinitely. When Ty Cobb was suspended indefinitely for what he did, his teammates were upset. And they said, if Ty Cobb doesn't play, we won't play. The president of the American League said, okay, Detroit Tigers, if you don't play, every game you don't play, you are fined $5,000. Well, $5,000 is like $250,000 now, or more. So the Tigers were keen not to be fined. The president of the Detroit Tigers called Connie Mack in Philadelphia, who was the president and owner of the Philadelphia A's, and said, Connie, we need you to find us a baseball team that we can put into Tiger uniforms so that they can play when we're supposed to be out there playing you in 2 days. So Connie Mack combed the streets of Philadelphia looking for baseball players, put together a team of people who were like Al Travers, not quite the best in the world, and they played as the Detroit Tigers in 1 game. And this is the result. This is the result of the game. Philadelphia 24, Detroit 2. Travers' pitching stats were 24 runs, 26 hits, 7 walks, 1 strikeout. Can you imagine? Imagine that guy, how long it took him to live it down? And a 15.75 ERA. The world champion Athletics used all their regular players in the game. They didn't slough off. And after that game, the strike was broken. The Tiger regulars returned the next day. But all the one-day wonders who played in that game are in the official record book of baseball, and you can find them by name in there. The next we find Fred Merkel on the right. All right, he's a guy that makes artificial fishing lures, and he's been extremely successful in doing it for many years. He's with Larry Doyle, and they're both former New York Giant players. Okay, and that's a photograph of them in 1950 returning to the Polo Grounds. This is his obituary. Now, if you think that If you think the New York Times was a little arrogant in the way they phrased things, he didn't do well in many other papers either. These are some other headlines when he died. Bonehead fame, yes. The goat who boobed the world.
What year did he die?
I wish you hadn't asked. I may have. He was. Let's see. Did we not? Did it say? 67 years old. So he lived a while. Okay. So let's see where he got his nickname from. All right. This is September 23rd, 1908 in the Polo Grounds. The Cubs and the Giants are in the midst of a hot pennant race. There's an overflow crowd on hand. This is an overflow crowd in the Polo Grounds. At the time, there was no center field wall. There was nothing out there but expanse. So the fans were seated starting here and coming all the way around, and they weren't seated necessarily. There's a rope out there, and they stay behind the rope. And that's the overflow crowd in the Polo Grounds for this particular in 1908. That's a great photo, by the way, and it's Coogan's Bluff up there and everything. So they're in the midst of a hot pennant race. Overflow crowd is on hand. It's the bottom of the ninth, 2 out, and the score is tied 1-1. And Moose McCormick is at the plate. Moose always signed his autographs with a stamp of a moose head and then wrote McCormick underneath. All right. He singles. Great. Fred Merkle comes up. Fred Merkle singles, sending Moose McCormick to third. So you got runners on first and third. And there are 2 out. All right. So you've got runners on first and third, Fred on first, Moose on third, score tied 1-1, 2 out. And Al Bridwell is at bat. Al Bridwell singles, scoring McCormick from third. McCormick, this was from the New York Times the next day. McCormick trots home, the merry villagers flock on the field to worship the hollow where Matheson's feet may have pressed, and all of a sudden there is doings at second base. And the doings, again, remind you of the crowd out there in right field where the ball went when the ball was hit for the single that scored Moose McCormick. Johnny Evers, of the combination Tinker to Evers to Chance, all right, the Cubs, the shortstop, he grabs a baseball. Where he got it from, nobody knows. He grabs a baseball and an umpire, and he marches them to second base. He touches second base, claiming that Fred Merkle never made it to second. Therefore, Merkle is out, and the runner on third base does not count, and 3 outs is it, and the game is over. The umpire agrees. No. 1-1 tie. Now, this is after the fact. This is, although it's not really fair to say that Fred Merkle's mental error cost the Giants the 1908 pennant. First of all, it was common practice in those days to run off the field after the winning run had scored. Furthermore, the Giants lost 6 more games after the Merkle game. But in the replay of this game, the teams were tied in terms of where they were in standings. So the replay of the tie game was on October 8th. Pitching for the New York Giants was Christy Mathewson. Pitching for the Chicago Cubs was Mordecai Three-Finger Brown. And why Three-Finger? because he had a farm accident one time and lost a couple of them. As you can see, his fingers down. A two-way approach to his pitching hand there. Okay. And upshot, the Cubs with Mordecai beat the Giants 4-2. Mordecai Brown beat Christy Mathewson. The Cubs went on to win the 1908 World Series against the Tigers, and this would be the last World Series win for the Cubs until 2016, 108 years later. All right. So that's the Merkel blunder. There he is again. Next guy we're going to talk about is Fred Snodgrass. He was a very successful rancher in California and became the mayor of Oxnard. Does anybody know Oxnard? Is it really there? Okay. Maybe I don't think they made that up. All right. So he was the mayor of Oxnard, and this is his obituary. Ball player muffed, 1912 fly. That's it. That's how you will be remembered. All right. What happened? Fred Snodgrass. There he is. All right. It's the 1912 World Series. The series is tied 3 games apiece. There has been one tie. So this is the 8th game in the series. It's in Fenway Park. Brand new Fenway Park. Christy Mathewson, once again, pitching for the Giants. He previously had pitched 3 shutouts in the World Series back in 2005. In 1912, he went 23-12. Good ERA. Great career stats. One of the first 5 players voted into the Hall of Fame. Pitching for the Red Sox was a guy named Hugh Bedient. He was a rookie. He went 20-9 for the Sox that year. He had already beaten the Giants in the series earlier on, beating Matheson. So he was back again, matchup back again. It's game 8. So it's after 9 innings, the score is tied 1-1. The top of the 10th inning, Smokey Joe Wood pitching for the Red Sox. He'd gone 34-7, already won 2 games in the World Series. Giants first baseman Merkel drives in the go-ahead run. And the Giants are ahead 2-1, going into the bottom of the 10th. First batter is Clyde Engel, who was not really a starter, but he was now playing outfield for the Red Sox. He hit a routine fly ball to Fred Snodgrass. Fred Snodgrass was a notoriously great outfielder. Ball came to Snodgrass and he dropped it. Engel, kept running, so he was on second base with nobody out. Harry Hooper, Hall of Famer, right fielder for the Red Sox. When they had Hugh Duffy, Harry Hooper, and the doubles guy, one of the first 10 in the Hall of Fame. I can't think of it. Tris Speaker in center field. Yeah. Okay. Harry Hooper hits a smash way out there in center field, and Snodgrass goes chasing it, and he makes a leaping, diving catch of the ball. A miraculous catch that only a guy like Snodgrass, who's a great fielder, can make. Meanwhile, the runner on second tags and goes to third. So there's one out. Steve Yerkes, the utility outfielder, comes in and he walks. So the bottom of the 10th, there's runners on first and third with one out. Up, here he is. Tris Speaker, one of the first 10 in the Hall of Fame. Tris Speaker hits a pop-up down the first base line. It's midway between first and the catcher. The first baseman doesn't move. Catcher doesn't move. Christy Matheson's yelling for the catcher to catch the ball. It's closer to the first baseman. Finally, the catcher starts running for it. The catcher is Chief Myers on the left. The first baseman is Fred Merkel, who you know from before, on the right. All right. The ball drops in foul territory, uncaught. You don't do that to Tris Speaker. Tris Speaker comes up and singles to left, scoring Ingles from third, tying the game. Yerkes moves from first to third. Speaker moves from second, the throw-in. So the throw-in was offline, and Speaker got to second. Score tied 2-2, runners on second and third, and one out. And up comes Larry Gardner, who hits a deep sacrifice fly, which should have been the third out. And this winning run scores on the sacrifice. So, Fred Snodgrass off the fly ball. There's a team photograph of some of the culprits with Christy Matheson and John J. McGraw. Fred Merkel on the left and Fred Snodgrass on the right. And now we'll move on to one last obituary, and this is Tyrus Raymond Cobb, greatest player who ever lived. That's what his obituary said. Upon his retirement in 1928, he held 90 all-time records. He still holds the highest lifetime batting average, 366. He batted over 300 for 23 straight seasons. He batted over 400 in 3 seasons. He won 12 batting titles, including 9 in a row. He stole 894 bases, including stealing home 54 times. Because what did his contemporaries think of him? If there were a league higher than the majors, there would be only one player in it, Ty Cobb. That's Smokey Joe Wood. And Grantland Rice said, Ty Cobb getting a walk is as exciting as Babe Ruth hitting a home run. The greatness of Ty Cobb was something that had to be seen, and to see him was to remember him forever, was George Sisler. Mean and magnificent Fred Lieb. He didn't out-hit the competition. He didn't outrun them. He out-thought them. And Babe Ruth was baseball's greatest artisan. Ty Cobb was its only artist. That's what his contemporaries thought of him. If you look at the Hall of Fame balloting, 1936, the people in red are the people who got in. You'll notice that Ty Cobb got certainly the highest percentage of votes, followed by Hannes Wagner and Babe Ruth, who were tied for second, followed by Christy Matheson and then Walter Johnson. So those are the first 5. And this is the day he died, and it's not quite an obituary, but it's the sports page version of one. Cobb hailed as greatest player in history. It goes on from there. It's 1961 when he died. Okay. Between his death in 1961 and 1997, something happened to his reputation. This is the all-time all-star team selected by the Baseball Writers Association of America in 1997. And if you see one name that's conspicuously absent, you're correct. Ty Cobb isn't there. Now, I guess speaking directly, his position was center field. And Willie Mays is there. Okay. a sports writer, one sports writer, disagreed at the time. There was not a big outcry from the sports writing community. One sports writer in particular disagreed. Shirley Povich. It says, my colleagues in the Baseball Writers Association have chosen their all-time all-star team. In most cases, they're most perceptive and correct. In some cases, they are nuts. One choice that leaps out is all-time center fielder, Willie Mays over Ty Cobb. What an aberration. What delirium. 2 and 2 make 6. The world is flat. Trouble is, there are too many baby boomers in the press box. Who was Shirley Povich? Sports writer, lived from 1905 to 1998. Washington Post sports writer, wrote daily columns from 1923 on till 74. Wrote 400 additional columns after retiring. Was a war correspondent in the battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. In 1961 was listed in Who's Who in American Women. In 1975 won the Spinks Award in the Baseball Hall of Fame. And that's what she looked like. And he was the master of sentences like these. On Jackie Robinson signing with the Dodgers in 46, 455 years after Columbus eagerly discovered America, Major League Baseball reluctantly discovered the American Negro. And Don Lawson's perfect game, 1,000,000-to-1 shot came in, hell froze over, a month of Sundays hit the calendar. Don Larson today pitched a no-hit, no-run, no-man reached first base game in a World Series. So he was a fiery writer and very opinionated, but very experienced as well. Again, back to the all-time all-star team from 1997. So, what happened to Ty Cobb? All right. Times changed. The game of baseball changed dramatically. It went from dead ball to live ball, and even hot ball, you could say. Small ball to power ball. Post-World War II, there was an era of prosperity that occurred, and we went from being kind of a hard-scrabble people to a more privileged bunch of people. Cobb was no longer a part of our collective memory at that point. Nice guys no longer finish last, as Leo DeRocher used to say. And after his death in 61, Cobb became the target of a vindictive campaign to discredit him and his accomplishments. For what reason? Make money. Number one, it was easy to dislike him, so you could build on that and make a fortune. And we're going to get into how fortunes were made. Sources of the smear campaign were Al Stump's 1961 so-called autobiography, which he wrote with Cobb while Cobb was mostly comatose, and called My Life in Baseball, The True Record. His subsequent serialization of Cobb's last days was published in True magazine, which was all made up. Almost every word was made up. After Cobb's death, Al Stump forged Cobb's diaries. This has all been shown to be correct, and his memorabilia. His writing became the principal source of information about Cobb and his life. It was the basis for Charles Alexander's 1984 biography of Cobb. And in 1995, the movie Cobb, starring Tommy Lee Jones, the director improvised. He admitted he improvised non-incidents from Cobb's life. In this PBS baseball series, Ken Burns used Cobb as a villain to set up Ruth as the good guy. The Stumpisms that folks have come to believe are that he was a dirty ball player, that he was an avowed racist, that he routinely pistol whipped African Americans on the streets, that he may have killed as many as 3 people. He was nasty to kids who wanted his autograph. Not only was he nasty, he would steam the stamps off their letters so that he could, use the stamps again. And he was just an awful person. He was an embarrassment to the game. I think you know what his peers thought about him being an embarrassment to the game. He was hated by his peers. Not true. And no fellow ball players came to his funeral. All right. In 2015, historian Charles Learnson, thank you, going back to original sources where possible, published a new biography of Cobb. And I've got it over there on the table. It's called Cobb, A Terrible Beauty. And it was a New York Times bestseller, and it pretty well refutes the Stumpisms that we have come to know. What is the Stumpisms that Larson refutes? He was a dirty ball player. Ty Cobb had, running the bases, he had 9 different slides to get into a base, to avoid the tag. And he could demonstrate 9 different slides into a base to avoid the tag. If you would not let him avoid the tag, if you blocked his base path, you were fair game. But he would do anything to score the run, because if he bowled into you, you might hold on to the ball and he'd be out. So that was not in his best interest to do that. He was an avowed racist. He often went to Negro League games and was often invited to sit in the dugouts with the players, and he did so graciously and thoughtfully. He routinely pistol whipped African Americans on the street? No, he did not. He did not kill anybody. He was nasty to kids who wanted his autograph. He would go out of his way. He would write 4- and 5-page letters back to kids who wrote him asking for his autograph. He was not a saint. Avowed racist. Major League Baseball was an avowed racist at the time. He was born in Georgia, but he was descended from a line of abolitionists. His father was a politician, and who often was very tolerant in his points of view, but especially on racial matters. Okay, he was an embarrassment to the game, hardly, and he was hated by his peers, and nobody wanted to come to his funeral. Stump should have known that the last request of Cobb was that at his funeral that it be a private funeral and no one come. So that was his wish, and so you find after the fact that many would have come and gladly participated. Okay, there he is. The hitter comparison. If you do this by batting average, you can go down the list. You can see Ty Cobb clearly has everybody beat batting average. But interestingly enough, and this is normalized for a 162-game season, given his total career stats, normalized it for a 162-game season so that everybody's on a par in terms of what their season would look like. He's got 360, but 104 RBIs in a season. That's not shabby. 433 on-base percentage, slugging 512. 945 on-base percentage plus slugging is pretty darn good. And, of course, stolen base, he's way ahead of everybody else. You see Ted Williams has the highest on-base percentage. Babe Ruth has the highest RBI and slugging and OPS and so forth. And if you compare Willie Mays, who in the 1971 team beat out Ty Cobb for center field, you can see that his numbers are 302 versus 367, 103 RBIs versus 104, 384 on base percentage versus 433, 557. His slugging percentage is up to 512, and but it's still on base plus slugging is below Cobb's, and certainly his stolen bases. He stole a lot of bases, but not as many as Cobb. Yes, sir.
One thing that doesn't reflect, though, is Willie Mays' outfield.
That's true,
Yeah.
but
So that may have been the thing that swung him because of what an amazing outfield he was.
well, amazing outfield versus adequate. Ty Cobb didn't drop many fly balls. There were some balls that Willie Mays got that Ty Cobb couldn't have gotten. But it's an interesting discussion, and that's why I raise it so that you can have these discussions among yourselves. The class of their generation. Now compare him to his peers. Here's a chart that compares people to their peers. Now Ty Cobb played from 1905 to 1928. The average of players, his average was 367. The average of the era, that's not earned run average, that's the era that he played in, was 264. So he batted 103 points higher than the average of his era. If you go down the list, Ted Williams was 84 points higher, Willie Keeler 80, Tony Gwynn 78, Rod Carew 73, Cap Anson 70, so forth. Roberto Clemente 67, Babe Ruth 65. So that's an indicator. And there are 1,000 indicators. Just don't give me wins above replacement, because nobody can tell me how they got there. Too many factors thrown in that pot. All right. Here's the body of work. Ty Cobb's lifetime batting average was based upon having 4,189 hits in 11,000 at-bats. If Cobb had played 5 more seasons, an additional 2,500 at-bats, and never gotten another hit, he still would have finished with a lifetime batting average of 300. That's how strong that 367 is over that period of time. Okay. Was Cobb the best? That's up for you to decide. You can read the book. You can think more about him than the 1971 baseball writers did. Now, let's worry just a few minutes about the Westminster Canterbury connection. Westminster Canterbury is connected to Major League Baseball in several ways. Here's one. Helen Giggs Smith, who lived here at Westminster Canterbury, died in 2019. She played for the Kenosha Comets and the Grand Rapids Chicks in the Women's Professional Baseball League. It was considered an equivalent of the Major League Baseball at the time. If you bought Major League Baseball magazine, the last half of that magazine was devoted to the Women's Baseball League. She played. She was good. And all the girls in that professional baseball league have a special room in the Baseball Hall of Fame. She's in there. The other direct representative here was Eddie Casco. Eddie Casco was shortstop for the Chicago Cubs and the Cincinnati Reds. He was a two-time All-Star. He played in the 1961 World Series against the New York Yankees, where he batted over 300. He was the Red Sox manager from 70 to 73, and he's the third winningest manager in Red Sox history. And he is in the Red Sox Hall of Fame. He lived here and died in 2020. One more connection is a man named Frank Mayock. Frank Mayock, that's Frank Mayock. And besides from being a snappy dresser, Frank was a great man. He lived here, as it says, from 2007 to 2012. But that's Frank in World War II. Now, Frank didn't care about baseball. All right, he was not a baseball fan. He fished. He played golf. He didn't care one whit about baseball. But he was a naval aviator in the Second World War. And this is his citation for the Navy Cross. The Navy Cross is for exceptional heroism. It's just below the Congressional Medal of Honor. What he did was fly his torpedo plane underneath the gun sights of Japanese ships and put two torpedoes into a Japanese aircraft carrier, sinking it. Avoided the gunfire on his way out, avoided enemy aircraft on his way out, and made it back in the vicinity of his aircraft carrier to land, but wasn't able to do so. So ditched in the water and was fished out of the water the next day. He won the Navy Cross for exceptionally meritorious, exceptionally heroic activity. His claim to fame was he taught Ted Williams how to fly. Ted Williams went in the service in World War II, and they knew he had tremendous skills, and physical and mental skills. And he became part of a Navy program that was operated out of the University of North Carolina, which was either V5 or V12 program, where he was taught to be an officer. And he was, I have a picture of him in a football uniform. He was playing football. He learned to play they did escape and evasion. They did all the things that were necessary for ground, to make an officer out of a high school graduate, and do it with all the training that would be necessary for his survival and for his furtherance as a naval aviator downhill. After he finished that, he went to Pensacola, where Frank Mayock had been reassigned. And Frank used to tell us about what an ornery person Ted was, and how they, in order to straighten him out, they'd send him up doing lazy circles at stall speed, so that he would almost crash and then have to pull himself out and keep going. And this is one final picture of Ted in Korea. Ted was the wingman of the person on the right. Does anybody know who that person is? Who's it? No. John Glenn. You got it. If we had a prize, you'd win it. And that's Ted. Ted was a very successful aviator there. He had to crash land one plane, and he was a heck of a person through it all. So, again, as George Carlin says, the object of baseball is to go home and be safe. So I invite you all to do so, and I thank you for your attention. What's that?
You gonna give another program on something?
Did you missed the great strategy of the Byzantine Empire? No, truly, it's available. It's available on YouTube.
And I'll always remember that.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. He played for Richmond Braves. He lived just locally here, and married.
Avenue in the apartment of my grandfather.
Okay, and he married a local girl, and that's why he wound up here at Westminster Canterbury after he retired. So forth.
And Skip Ford was in his wedding.
Skip Ford was in his wedding, right? There you go. Small world. Anybody else? Sir. I have no idea about misericordia. No.
It seems the whole tone of your talk and everything else is somewhat tongue-in-cheek, right? And at what stage from 1900 until today did it become something that you really care about, rather than it all being tongue-in-cheek? Or Does that make no sense?
No, I was raised as the kid who had to make people laugh, okay? So my tongue-in-cheek is my life. I get serious about everything. I'm serious about Ty Cobb. But I can't, if I stood here and gave you a bland, straight-faced lecture, you wouldn't come. So I do it my way. That's my way. I've been serious about baseball for a long time. I think right now, I think it's going down the toilet. But other than that, I am very serious about the game. I'm more serious about baseball than I am about most things in life.
That's right. Don't hold it back.
No.